Slava Mariupol, Our Family Story. Episode 7, Aftermath and Occupation. After Mother escaped Mariupol on May 7th, the last remaining holdouts in the city were Azov Regiment and Ukrainian Marines holed up in the gigantic Azovstal steel plant. During these days, Azovstal defenders flew numerous suicide helicopter missions into Azovstal, bringing in supplies and ammunition and carrying out wounded. These flights were just incredible, flying through 50 miles of enemy territory 15 or 20 feet off the ground. Some of them didn't make it, but the majority of them were successful. They should really make a movie about this one day. But eventually, the relentless Russian bombing of Azovstal took its toll, and the president of Ukraine ordered the defenders to surrender to save their own lives, which they did on May 16th, 2022. At that point, all the fighting in Mariupol came to an end. Satellite images of the two largest cemeteries in the area, Mangush and Stary Krim, show around 20,000 new graves were dug in those 3 months. Estimates of the dead in Mariupol range from 25,000 to 87,000, which would put it on par with Hiroshima. But we will never know for sure the true number because many of the dead were never recorded or buried. Russia brought in mobile crematoria to dispose of both their own dead to avoid paying compensation and civilian deaths in the city. This photo was taken next to a Russian checkpoint leaving Mariupol. Let's take a look at the aftermath in the area around Hospital Number 2. Here's an aerial shot that shows Port City Mall on the right, the hospital in the background, Shevchenka heading east to the left, and the traffic circle. You can see 63 Kuprina right in front of the hospital. This is looking out from 69 Kuprina or so at this lady walking her dog. Here's a ride heading south down the Kuprina access road, starting around Metropolitska and heading towards Miru.
Это торговый центр. Люди пытаются найти что-то удобное, видимо. Так, осторожно пойдем.
Now we'll look at the rest of the city, starting with Kirov Square. I'll let these images speak for themselves. The Russians made sure to target all the newly beautified buildings along Miru.
Спиздили, попиздили, все.
This bus stop is on Metallurgiv, right across the street from the Central Rynok. What I just showed you is a small sampling of the destruction in Mariupol. But if you visit Mariupol destruction map, you can see literally thousands and thousands and thousands of such scenes around the city. By their very nature, bomb shelters have to be publicized so that people know where to go. Aside from the Drum Theater, Russia bombed other bomb shelters in Mariupol, including the Palace of Culture, the Ukraina Mall on Miru, and the Neptune Pool, in which over 400 were killed. Over 80% of Mariupol's housing stock was either destroyed or severely damaged by the Russian onslaught. This includes 1,700 multi-unit apartment buildings and 11,000 private homes. In addition, 20 hospitals and 48 schools were destroyed by the Russians. On July 29th was the Olenivka prison massacre, in which 60 Azovstal prisoners of war who had just surrendered in May were murdered in their barracks by a Russian bomb. In August 2022, 63 and 65 Kuprina were both demolished, with the dead bodies still inside. These bones and rubble were then crushed up and used to widen Kuprina, which is the main route to the Zaporizhzhia front line for tanks. In September, Russia held a completely free and fair election at gunpoint in which residents decided whether they wanted to join Russia. In 2023, Russia finished the new Nevsky apartments, which are on Kuprina, just northwest of the intersection with Miru. This is what's called a Potemkin village. They can go inside here with wide-angle lens and make it look like the whole city has been rebuilt, when, as you can see from the foreground, that is not the case. On March 19, 2023, Putin supposedly visited the Nevsky apartments. They have video of him driving a little economy car down Kuprina and then talking to these people at the apartments. I have my doubts if it was really him. He's so paranoid, and this was one of the most disease-ridden cities in the world. Yet these are the same 5 or 6 people that you see in all of his videos, so maybe it really was him. Now we'll look at life under occupation. The population of Mariupol now is around 140,000, less than a third of what it was pre-invasion. Of those, around 30,000 lived there prior to 2022. First thing the occupiers started to do was eliminate all signs of Ukrainian identity. Here they are taking Ukrainian language books and throwing them out the window at the technical university to be burned. Anyone speaking Ukrainian language in public was likely to be sent to filtration. Here they are trying to rewrite history by removing the Holodomor monument across the street from the Drum Theater. Soviet place names and monuments have returned to Mariupol. Here a Lenin statue has been brought out of storage for display. Freedom Square is now Lenin Square, and Miru Avenue is back to being called Lenin Avenue. The mural overlooking Freedom Square of the girl injured by Russia losing her arm was painted over. Many schools in Mariupol were destroyed. Here's an example of education in Mariupol, school number 41 on the left bank. It replaces 7 other schools that were destroyed, and students must walk up to 1 hour. There is electricity in the building, but no windows and no heat. All the instruction is Russian propaganda about how these students losing their city, their friends and family is all good for them. Ukrainian families that are still in Mariupol do not want to send their kids to these Russian propaganda schools, so they try homeschooling. But the authorities keep track of attendance, and the parents are warned, then fined, then threatened with loss of their children if they don't go to the Russian schools. Internet access to online classes is blocked to prevent homeschooling, and there are searches of homes to ensure compliance. Occupiers deal with any recalcitrant students who resist their propaganda. Any students who refuse to forget about what Russia did to their city are sent to St. Petersburg for re-education. Security in Mariupol, of course, is very tight. There are military checkpoints all around the city. Here you see somebody being checked for patriotic Ukraine tattoos, which might get you sent to filtration. There are random searches of homes, and internet and phones are heavily monitored. Nothing has changed in the 20 or so filtration camps. There's still interrogations, still torture, still executions, still forced deportation to Russia. Partisan activity in Mariupol includes targeted assassinations of occupying officials. The Ukrainian letter Y, which does not exist in the Russian alphabet, is a symbol of resistance. Mariupol has suspicious fires and explosions, and somehow the occupiers managed to eat some poisoned watermelons. Russia is doing everything it can to force Russian citizenship upon any Ukrainians who remain in Mariupol. Russian passports are needed for work, housing, and medicine. If you show up at the clinic or the hospital, the first thing you have to show is your Russian passport or you will be turned away. Those who continually refuse Russian citizenship may be subject to deportation through filtration. Teenage boys' school records are collected so they could be considered for future conscription. After 4 years, Russia has only replaced a small fraction of the buildings that they destroyed in 2022. But those that they did replace are all along Miru Avenue on the M14 on the road to Crimea, so that journalists and visitors passing through can look around and say, oh, look, Mariupol's as good as new. But of course, that is not the case at all. The occupiers are offering 2% mortgages for any Russians who move to Mariupol, but this is not available to the previous residents. The property prices are very high. To the left, you see a one-room, 400 square foot apartment for sale for 5 million rubles, which is around $65,000. That's at least 4 times the price pre-invasion. So Ukrainian families just can't afford it, especially since there's no work. There are some houses in Mariupol that survived the invasion intact, but almost all those owners left for either Ukrainian territory or abroad. Russia is stealing these apartments. They post a notice in the paper or on the door and giving the owners 30 days to appear in person to claim their property. The owner first has to have a Russian passport to even be eligible to claim their house. And then the only route into Mariupol is through Russia. Russian border authorities have a list of these owners and they simply deny entry into Russia, blocking them from claiming their house. These houses are then nationalized and sold mostly to the previous residents of Mariupol for very high prices. These are people whose houses were bombed and destroyed, and yet they're giving nothing free. They have to buy someone else's stolen apartment. This is theft, plain and simple, but what else do you expect? Thieves steal. That's what they do. It's their nature. These Mariupol residents issued a video plea directly to Putin in January 2025, begging for new housing. They did not want to live in the nationalized apartments of former residents, saying directly that we are not thieves. This whole situation leads to a lot of the former residents of Mariupol living outdoors. These are all people camping outside in Mother's old neighborhood along Troitska. This is behind Rynok 17, and you also will see the Savona movie theater next to Terrasport. not wanting to live on the streets, the residents of 75 Kuprina refused to vacate their condemned building. Here you see it sitting alone with all the surrounding buildings already razed. Here you see the residents of 75 Kuprina with an SOS sign after the occupiers cut off electricity and water, which they still had in the reservoir back then, trying to force the residents to leave. Eventually, they were successful. The residents were forced out to live on the streets, and 75 Kuprina was leveled. The owner of Port City Mall did not return in person to claim his property, so it too was stolen by the Russians. Of course, they can't fix it, but they do know how to steal it. November 16th, 2024 was the first batch of 17-year-olds from Mariupol drafted into the Russian army. Last winter, 2024, there was no central heat in any of the houses. It's hard to rebuild all those bombed boilers. February 27th, 2025, the occupiers announced that running water in houses would only be available 6 hours a day, 3 in the morning and 3 at night. It turned out that that was way too optimistic. It wouldn't be Russian world without raw sewage flowing in the streets. It wouldn't be Russian world without packs of dogs roaming the streets. Summer of 2025 began a severe water crisis. Due to all the destroyed pipes and infrastructure, the reservoir dried up and there is no alternative source of drinking water. Everyone knows that it's far beyond the capabilities of the occupiers to repair what they destroyed. The residents know it, the occupiers know it, so they don't even bother offering even as much as false promises about schedules or plans to provide water. No, they simply blame Ukraine, shrug their shoulders, and that's the end of it.
А давайте завтра увидимся. Ломоносова 1,
Запомнил. Вас проводить до остановки?
Нет, спасибо, Аркадий. И давайте все-таки на ты, мы же не старые.
Тогда до завтра.
До завтра, Аркадий. На следующий день Аркадий навестил Дину, чтобы вернуть ей зонтик. Мне нравится, что...
Это Донецк, детка. Выживаем как можем. Может, хоть что-то накапает, хоть как-нибудь.
On November 20th, the Russian Duma formally legalized the theft of Ukrainian properties, a practice that began in Mariupol and spread to other occupied territories. Thieves steal. That's what they do. It's their nature. On December 28, 2025, the occupiers reopened the Drum Theater, an event that was televised nationwide in Russia. Here we see some pigs with lipstick dancing on the bones of women and children. Here's what's left of 63 Kuprina. The list of Russian war crimes and crimes against humanity in Mariupol is exhaustive. Deliberate attacks on civilian targets, such as hospitals, apartments, and shelters, which we ourselves witnessed in my family. Russia admitted kidnapping children and taking them to Russia. They abducted, tortured, and murdered civilians in Mariupol. They stole or denied humanitarian aid. They refused to allow civilians to evacuate, as happened to my mother-in-law. They withheld food, water, and medicine, as also happened to my mother-in-law. Forced deportation to the far east and Siberia of Russia of civilians. Killing and torture of POWs, as we saw in the prison massacre. And filtration and disappearances are ongoing even today. Next, I'll show you a clip from Mariupol, the People's Story, which sums up our feelings quite well.
Целенаправленно шел обстрел и уничтожение жилых кварталов, где мы жили. Авиаудары по жилым кварталам, по жилым домам. Тот же драмтеатр, да, когда появилась информация о том, что там убежище, там прячутся люди, конечно же, был нанесен такой масштабный удар. Да, это целенаправленное уничтожение города и его жителей. Я тоже так считаю. Ну, я в этом не сомневаюсь, потому что мы это видели собственными глазами. Это геноцид 100%. Потому...
That's it for this episode. Thank you for watching. Next episode, we give our final thoughts.